The evening sky over Maple Creek was painted with drifting clouds, their edges glowing faintly orange as the sun sank low behind the horizon. A restless wind moved through the open fields, carrying with it the damp scent of hay, rust, and the heavy memory of rain. Out there, far beyond the chatter of diners and the safety of front porches, silence stretched wide and deep. It was the kind of silence that made your skin prickle, the kind that suggested the land itself had secrets it refused to share. Officer Jack Turner knew that silence well. He guided his patrol car slowly down a cracked county road, the headlights cutting pale tunnels into the dusk. The car hummed steadily, but his mind was elsewhere. Jack was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, with chestnut-brown hair cropped close and storm-gray eyes that had seen too much of the world already. Those eyes carried lines not from laughter, but from endurance, carved into him through years of discipline and duty. Once, before the badge, there had been a uniform of another kind, an army uniform. He had traded deserts and gunfire for small town, roads and broken fences, believing that protecting was worth more than destroying. But even in Maple Creek, peace never lasted. His marriage hadn't survived the weight of worry and the long nights when she waited, wondering if he would come home. She had left years ago, leaving only the badge, the uniform, and the silence. The silence, and Bruno. Beside him in the passenger seat sat the one partner who never left. Bruno was a German shepherd, 10 years old, his once dark sable coat now streaked with silver that shimmered faintly under the passing streetlights. Time had left its marks, but not its weakness. Bruno's dark eyes still burned with focus and intelligence, the kind of awareness no human could match. He had saved Jack's life more than once, standing between him and danger without hesitation. Officially, Bruno was retired. In truth, he had never stopped being Jack's shadow, his protector, his family. As the patrol car rolled over the uneven gravel, Bruno suddenly stiffened. His head lifted, ears twitching, and then a sharp bark broke the night's stillness. His nose pressed hard to the window, body rigid with alertness. Jack's eyes followed the dog's gaze, and his stomach tightened. Out there, barely visible behind wild grass that had grown taller than a man's knees, sat a farmhouse that had no business being alive with attention. The structure sagged with age. Wood panels faded into ashen gray, the roof drooping like tired shoulders carrying too many storms. The barn beside it leaned into the weeds, its door yawning half open like a mouth mid-breath. Fields once green with corn or wheat now drowned under thistles, briars, and weeds, choking out any memory of life, Jack muttered under his breath. Nobody's lived here in 20 years. But his memory stirred with whispers. He had heard the talk, the way old men lowered their voices in the diner. The farm was cursed, they said. Some claimed it had been a prohibition hideout for bootleggers. Others swore smugglers had used the tunnels beneath it. And a few whispered of ghosts that refused to leave the soil they died on. Jack didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in signs, in footprints left behind, in the instincts of a dog who had never been wrong. Bruno's rigid posture told him something real was there, something worth finding. He stepped out of the patrol car, boots crunching against the gravel, as the night air pressed close. Bruno leapt down gracefully, his body landing with a sharp readiness that belied his age. His nose lowered immediately to the ground, tugging at the leash with purpose. Jack followed, eyes narrowing on the farmhouse. The front door swayed gently, on its swollen hinges, groaning under the breath of the wind. Jack pushed it open, and a sour wave of damp wood and rot rolled out to greet him. Dust floated lazily through the fading light that leaked in from broken windows, swirling in ghost-like shapes before fading into shadow. Each step Jack took made the old boards creak like a warning, the sound carrying too far in the hollow rooms. Bruno moved carefully from corner to corner, sniffing shadows, tracing scents older than dust. Then suddenly his body froze. His tail went rigid, his ears pinned back, and with a deep bark that echoed through the farmhouse, he clawed at the floorboards near the back wall. Jack knelt, running a hand along the seams of the wood. They were newer than the rest of the boards, as if someone had been here recently trying to cover something. Before he could investigate further, Bruno darted toward a side door. His nails scraped against the floor as he reached it, barking again with urgency. The doorway led to a staircase, slanted and narrow, its steps falling into a darkness that smelled of secrets. The air that drifted up was colder, carrying with it the metallic tang of iron and something acid, a smell that didn't belong in a simple cellar. Jack's hand slid toward the flashlight on his belt as his eyes met Bruno's. The shepherd's hackles stood tall, his frame tense, nose twitching at the invisible trail. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered. Bruno barked once, sharp and commanding, before lowering his head toward the stairwell as if to say, "Down there. That's where it is." Jack's boots pressed carefully against the stone steps, worn smooth by generations long gone. Each step creaked with age, and the darkness pressed closer the deeper he went. Bruno followed, moving low, his body a coiled spring of muscle and instinct. At the bottom, the cellar opened wide, its stone walls lined with racks that had long lost their bottles. Cobwebs hung heavy, but under them the dirt floor carried something new, fresh footprints. Jack bent low, running his fingers across the impressions. Thick-soled boots. Recent. Maybe a day old. Bruno pushed forward, growling softly as his nose traced the ground to a cluster of old crates piled against the far wall. Behind them, half buried in dust, was a wooden hatch. Jack's pulse hammered as he dragged the crates aside and pulled it open. The rush of air that escaped was colder than the cellar itself, laced with the stench of mold and iron. His flashlight beam revealed a ladder disappearing into an unnatural tunnel carved by human hands. The people of Maple Creek might talk of ghosts, but Jack knew better. Where fear kept neighbors away, criminals found shelter. Bruno whimpered low, his eyes locked on the dark opening. Jack rested a hand on his partner's head. "Easy, boy. We'll figure this out." But his mind was already racing. 3 days had passed since Emily Carter, the mayor's daughter, had vanished. Posters covered storefront windows. Volunteers had searched every field, every ditch. Nothing. Could this place, this forsaken farm, be the key? The wind howled through the broken beams above, making the walls moan with age. The cellar groaned under the weight of silence as Bruno pressed closer to the hatch, pawing with urgency. Jack's breath came heavier as he spotted something new wedged in the corner. An iron door, its steel frame out of place in the crumbling stone. Rust ate at its lock, but it was too modern for the cellar's age. Then his flashlight beam caught it. Blood. Not a pool, but a trail. Dark drops smeared into the dirt, leading toward the steel door before vanishing beneath it. His throat tightened. The blood was fresh enough to cling to the dust, not yet faded into the soil. Just feet away, a length of rope lay twisted on the ground, knotted and frayed. One end was stiff with dried blood. The other had been severed, jagged and uneven, as though someone had broken free. Jack stared, his heart pounding. Bruno let out a quiet whine, drawing Jack's attention again. The dog had moved toward the right side of the entryway and was sniffing at something half buried beneath old plaster dust and splintered wood. Jack walked over, brushing away the debris with a gloved hand. A necklace? No, not just a necklace. A child's rosary bracelet, wooden beads, maybe hand-carved with a small brass cross dangling from it. The cord had snapped clean in half, the beads scattered. Jack picked up the few that remained, turning them over in his hand. One bore a faint engraving. Faith. His jaw tightened. None of this matched the story. The town believed that this was just a broken-down old farm filled with shadows and rumors. This was a trap door to something real, something dark. Jack looked at Bruno. "You were right, boy." Bruno responded with a sharp bark, stepping squarely in front of the steel door. His hackles were raised, ears pinned back, body angled defensively. He scratched at the base of the door, then sniffed violently and let out another low growl. Jack approached cautiously, eyeing the door. He reached out and placed a hand on the surface cold like ice. There was no keypad, no electronic lock, just a rusted mechanical latch and bolts that had once been painted over in gray, but were now caked in flaking brown corrosion. He tested the handle. It didn't move. "I've seen you before," Jack muttered. It reminded him of a door he and his unit had once found in a poppy processing facility overseas, hidden in the back of what looked like a medicine storehouse. That door had held men, chained and broken. That door had screamed when it was opened. Jack stepped back, reached to his belt, and pulled out his flat steel pry bar, long, narrow, with a fine hooked edge. He positioned it under the locking bracket and pushed slowly, testing the give. The door didn't move. Bruno turned his body sideways, placing himself directly in front of Jack as if shielding him. His growl deepened, paws firm against the ground, and he glanced back once, his eyes sharp with warning. Jack paused and scanned the dark once more. Then he heard it, a sound from behind the door, muffled like movement, something dragging. Then came a sharp breath, sudden and panicked. It was faint, but human. Jack's chest tightened. "There's someone in there." His voice echoed off the stone walls, swallowed by the weight of the cellar. He reset the pry bar and leaned in harder, muscles straining. The metal groaned but held fast. He took a step back and muttered under his breath, "Fine, let's do it the hard way." He dropped to knee, jammed the pry bar deeper into the seam, and began to work it like a lever. Bruno stood right behind him now, watching the door, his tail down, but stiff. The dog's ears twitched. He barked sharply, not out of fear but warning. Bruno was telling him, "Whatever's on the other side, it's awake." Jack felt the pry bar slip slightly, then grip. He drove his shoulder into it with renewed force. The lock creaked. A tiny flake of rust fell loose. Bruno leaned forward, nose nearly touching the seam, letting out a rumble that sounded like thunder, waiting to crack. The door shifted half an inch at most, but it was enough. Jack could feel it. One more push. He exhaled sharply, squared his stance, and drove his full weight into the bar, bracing with both hands. His boots scraped against the stone as he pulled, the pressure turning his shoulders into knots, and the door slowly began to give. The steel door moaned as it finally gave way, hinges shrieking in protest as Jack heaved it open inch by inch. Dust swirled out from the narrow opening, and with it came the unmistakable scent of sweat, fear, and something deeper, desperation soaked into concrete. Bruno stepped forward instantly, nose in the air, tail low but alert. Jack raised his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the small, dark chamber beyond. The light caught on a form, slumped in the far corner of the room. Jack's breath hitched. He took 2 steps in and crouched. The beam now focused fully on a young woman curled into herself. Her arms, bound tightly with plastic zip ties, a gag stretched across her mouth. Her clothes, once neat, were now torn and stained with grime. Knees, scraped raw, and wrists red and swollen from struggling. Her light blonde hair was tangled, stuck to her sweat-drenched skin. Even in the dim light, he could see her lips trembling. She looked up. Wide eyes met his pale blue, filled with terror and exhaustion. But there was something else beneath the panic, recognition, as though she knew he was real, that someone had finally come. Jack spoke softly, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now. I'm Officer Jack Turner, Maple Creek Police Department. I'm here to get you out." The woman tried to speak, but her words were smothered by the cloth tied around her mouth. Jack reached behind her head and loosened the knot carefully. She gasped. for air as soon as it slipped free, coughing, then shivering violently. Jack pulled out the small bottle of water he kept in his jacket pocket and uncapped it. "Drink slowly." She took it with shaking hands, barely managing to lift it to her mouth. He helped steady her grip until she got a few sips down. When she finished, she let the bottle fall and closed her eyes tightly, then whispered, "Thank God." Jack glanced at Bruno, who was circling the edges of the room now, nose low to the ground. The dog stopped near the back wall, sniffed hard, then turned in a tight circle and growled softly. Jack's attention snapped back to the woman. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emily," she croaked. "Emily Carter." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Emily Carter, the mayor's daughter, 28, reported missing 3 days ago after leaving a community zoning meeting at City Hall. Her disappearance had ignited a media frenzy across the state. Search parties had combed the woods, and Jack himself had walked miles of dead farmland. And here she was, right beneath a house most people had forgotten. "You've been reported missing," Jack said. "The whole town's looking for you." "Your father's been—" "No," she interrupted, voice cracking. "They said he would do what they wanted, that he'd sign if they kept me hidden." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Emily shook her head slowly, like it physically hurt to remember. There were 3 of them. 2 younger guys, maybe mid-30s. One was taller, wore a black hoodie with white stripes on the sleeve. The other had a limp. His boot made this dragging sound. The third man was older. Didn't talk much. He just watched. I heard them say they were waiting for word from the boss. One of them called him the old man, but the other said the Trum, like a code word or title. Jack clenched his jaw. That name, Trump. He'd heard it once before during a cartel investigation 5 years back. It was a slang term used in smuggling circles to refer to someone high up, usually someone untouchable. If that name was floating around this case, things were worse than they appeared. As he processed the information, Bruno let out a low bark and nudged something with his paw. Jack rose and crossed Thesmall chamber. He crouched beside the dog and saw what had caught Bruno's attention. A fresh boot print, still damp with a thin layer of mud clinging to the concrete. Jack leaned in. The tread was unique, circular patterns around the heel and toe, military style. A single strand of dark cloth, possibly from a jacket sleeve, clung to a nail on the wall nearby. Bruno sniffed it and growled again. "We've got recent movement," Jack muttered. They weren't gone long. He turned back to Emily, who was now sitting upright with her back against the wall, still trembling, but beginning to come back to herself. "I need to get you out of here," Jack said. "You think you can walk?" Emily nodded. "I think so." Bruno padded over and sat next to her, pressing his body gently against her leg, his warm weight grounding. Emily looked down and slowly reached a shaky hand to touch his head. Bruno didn't move, just let her fingers rest there. "He's amazing," she whispered. Jack smiled faintly. "He's been through hell and back, and he's still standing." He helped Emily to her feet. She staggered once, knees buckling, and Jack caught her before she fell. "Easy. We're taking it slow." They stepped out of the room together. Bruno walked ahead, tail steady, head on a swivel, nose twitching at every scent. As they moved back into the outer cellar chamber, Jack paused and looked around. Something had shifted. Before, this place had just been a rumor, a forgotten ruin with creaking beams and ghost stories. Now it was a crime scene, a prison, and someone had built it to be permanent. Emily leaned against the wall to catch her breath. "I think they were going to move me. They talked about the window closing. I don't know what that meant." Jack nodded grimly. "Whatever it meant, we're not going to wait around to find out." As they began to ascend the stairs, Jack kept one hand on his sidearm, the other gripping Emily's arm for support. Bruno paused every few steps, listening. The air above had cooled, but there was a new tension clinging to it. Jack could feel it, in his bones. Whoever had locked her away in this place hadn't expected anyone to come this deep. And now that someone had, Jack knew this wasn't over. Jack moved carefully up the creaking cellar stairs, one arm steadying Amelia's. She leaned in too. Him, her steps uneven but determined. Bruno led the way, his movements controlled and precise, stopping at every second step to listen. The air at the top of the stairs was still heavy with dust and old wood, but something had changed. It felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks open the sky. They reached the ground floor of the farmhouse. The last light of the day had fully vanished, replaced by shadows slanting through the broken windows. Jack scanned the main room quickly. Movement. Just a breeze, shifting loose papers and cobwebs in the corners. He gently nudged the front door open, guiding Emily toward the threshold with Bruno sticking close behind. But before they could cross the porch, a noise shattered the silence, the crunch of boots on gravel. Then voices, male, low, and tense. Jack froze, pushing Emily back against the wall. Bruno lowered into a crouch, ears twitching forward. Jack peeked through the doorframe and spotted 3 figures moving up the path that cut through the tall grass. They were dressed in black dark hoodies, cargo pants, and work boots. One carried a heavy flashlight, another a rusted pipe, and the third held a long hunting knife, its blade catching the moonlight. The tallest man led the group. He had a broad, muscular build and moved with confidence, a cigarette hanging from the corner of his mouth. His hair was cropped short, and a jagged scar ran down the side of his neck. The man beside him had a slight limp, dragging his right foot every few steps. The third, the youngest, had sharp eyes and atwitch in his jaw, like someone always on edge. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She gripped Jack's arm tightly and whispered, "That one in front? The tall one? That's Rick Landry. He used to be one of my father's private security guards. He was in our house." Jack's eyes narrowed. Internal betrayal. That explained the access and the planning. He whispered back, "Can you run?" Emily shook her head. "Not fast enough." Jack scanned the room and quickly stepped back toward the kitchen, pointing Emily to crouch behind an overturned table. Bruno followed closely, his body pressed against her as if shielding her. Jack drew his service pistol, checked the chamber, and exhaled. Then the front door creaked open. The 3 men stepped in cautiously, sweeping the room with their eyes, their steps soft but confident. The man with the pipe muttered, "She's got to still be here." Door wasn't locked. "I don't like this." Rick. Rick didn't answer. He walked straight toward the stairs leading down to the cellar, flashlight raised. And that's when Bruno moved with a deep, explosive bark. The German shepherd lunged from the side, crashing into the man with the knife. His jaws locked onto the man's forearm, forcing him to drop the blade with a sharp cry. The man struggled, flailing wildly as Bruno dragged him to the ground, pinning him with sheer strength and precision. The other 2 turned in shock. Jack stepped out from behind the kitchen doorway and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "Hands where I can see them." The one with the pipe spun and charged. Jack didn't have time to fire again. He met the man head-on, grabbing the pipe as it swung down, the force of the impact jarring his arm. The 2 men grappled, slamming into the wall and knocking over furniture. Jack took a knee and drove his shoulder into the attacker's gut, sending him sprawling backward. Rick, the tall leader, bolted for the door, but Emily, trembling, breathless, stood in his path with a broken chair leg in her hand. Her face was pale, her arms shaking, but her stance was steady. Rick stopped, momentarily stunned by the sight of the girl he'd imprisoned, now daring to block him. "You're not getting out," she said through gritted teeth. Before Rick could react, Bruno released the man he had pinned and leapt at Rick from behind, tackling him to the floor. The big man fought back, swinging elbows, but Bruno's training took over. He clamped down on Rick's arm and held fast, growling as Rick howled in pain. Jack turned, now standing over the second attacker, who lay dazed near the couch. He kicked the pipe out of the man's reach and snapped handcuffs around his wrists. Emily collapsed back onto the floor, shaking as Bruno stood guard over Rick, teeth bared, his fur bristling like wildfire. Jack quickly cuffed the second man and rushed to the last, still groaning under Bruno's weight. Bruno off. The command was sharp, and the dog obeyed instantly, stepping back but staying ready. Jack pressed a knee to Rick's back and secured his wrists, checking for weapons. He pulled a tactical folding knife and a burner phone from Rick's jacket. Outside, the wind picked up and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Jack helped Emily up slowly. "You okay?" She nodded, tears beginning to slip down her cheeks. But she was breathing, standing. "I didn't think. I thought I'd never get out." Bruno walked up beside her and nudged her hand with his nose. She smiled faintly and stroked his head. "I think he saved me twice tonight." Jack radioed dispatch, voice calm but urgent. "This is Officer Turner. In need immediate backup and medics at the old Bellevue farm outside Maple Creek. I've got 3 suspects in custody, 1 female victim rescued, possibly connected to mayoral extortion case, sending GPS coordinates now." As he signed off, red and blue lights were already painting the distant sky, closing in. Bruno sat near the 3 subdued men, never taking his eyes off them. Jack put an arm around Emily's shoulder and led her toward the porch, where the wind was cool and the world felt slightly safer. Behind them, the old farmhouse stood still, but it no longer held its secrets. The farmhouse was bathed in blue and red flashes as the first patrol vehicles from Maple Creek Sheriff's Department tore up the gravel road, headlights slicing through the dark. The distant wail of sirens had grown louder, more urgent, and now they echoed through the fields like a long overdue alarm. Jack Turner stood at the edge of the porch, his back straight, his breath visible in the night air. His uniform was dirt-stained, the collar slightly torn from the earlier struggle, but his grip on his radio remained firm. 3 suspects lay restrained. Inside the house, bruised, groaning, and cuffed at the wrists and ankles with whatever backup restraints Jack had left in his gear bag. Bruno had herded them into the main room after their capture, pacing back and forth like a silent sentinel until Jack locked them down. The dog now sat on the porch beside Emily Carter, still watchful, ears perked, his breath steady, his body angled ever so slightly toward her like a living shield. Emily leaned into the railing, wrapped in Jack's spare jacket, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes clear now. She no longer shook violently, though the tremors came back whenever she thought too long about the basement. Bruno had sensed her unease early, nudging her hand gently with his nose, then planting himself beside her. Every time she looked at him, her shoulders lowered just a little more. The first officer out of the lead cruiser was Deputy Kyle Mendes, a tall man in his early 40s, barrel-chested and mustached, wearing a tactical vest over his flannel shirt. Kyle was known in town as the kind of cop who preferred humor to a gun, unless things got real. He had once talked a drunk man off the roof of the diner using only a harmonica and a pack of beef jerky. Tonight, however, his face was all business. "Jack," Kyle called out, jogging up the porch steps. "We got your call. 3 suspects inside." Jack nodded, stepping aside, tied and tagged. "One of them's Rick Landry. You'll remember him from the mayor's security detail." Kyle stopped in his tracks. "Landry? You sure?" "Saw him with my own eyes," Jack replied grimly. Emily confirmed it. Kyle's face tightened. Jesus. Internal betrayal. Behind him, more deputies began fanning out, heading into the house. Flashlights clicked on, voices called out, and radios buzzed. EMTs rolled in next, carrying medical bags and stretchers. Jack waved one over. Emily Carter. Minor injuries. Likely shock. Dehydration. Maybe some bruised ribs. She was held in a locked. Subalar, the EMT who stepped up, was Samantha Dyer, mid-30s, short and strong, with cropped auburn hair and calm, no-nonsense eyes. She wore her trauma bag like it was part of her body. She gave Jack a nod and knelt beside Emily. "Hi, Emily. I'm Sam. You're safe now. All right, we're going to check you out." Emily nodded mutely, then looked back at Bruno. "Can he ride with me?" Samantha looked at Jack, who answered before she could. "He'll stay with her. Don't worry." As Sam helped Emily toward the ambulance, Bruno followed close behind, not needing a command. He leapt into the back with a single movement, then sat right beside Emily on the bench seat. She reached out, resting her hand on his shoulder like she'd done it 100 times before. Jack watched them a moment longer before turning back to Kyle, who had just finished giving orders to secure the perimeter. "Something else," Jack said, lowering his voice. The girl heard them talking about a man they referred to as the Trump. They were going to use her as leverage to force the mayor's signature on an illegal development. Kyle blinked. "You thinking drug ties?" Jack nodded slowly. "Too organized to be. A loan ransom. In the tunnel under that house. It wasn't for storage. Someone was hiding something as if on cue. A dark green pickup truck pulled up near the barricade. Out stepped Lana Breck, a local reporter known for always showing up 10 minutes before she was supposed to. Lana was in her early 30s, tall and lean with a sharp jawline and an even sharper eye for stories. Her long brown coat was already coated in dust, and she clutched a camera like a weapon. Jack sighed audibly. "You got to be kidding me." Lana grinned, slightly, waving her press badge like it granted her divine permission. "Hey, you don't expect a girl to sleep through sirens like that, do you?" Kyle stepped forward. "Not a word gets published until this is processed through the department, Lana." She raised her hands innocently. "No names, just shots. Promise." She lifted the camera and snapped a few frames. Jack standing on the porch, deputies moving into the house, paramedics tending to Emily, and most of all, Bruno sitting silently in the ambulance beside the girl, head resting near her lap like a guardian carved from stone. Lana's voice softened. "You know that dog? He's going to be the town's new favorite story." Jack smirked but said nothing. By the time the suspects were loaded into the back of a sheriff's van, the scene had transformed into a hive of controlled activity. Crime scene tape fluttered across the barn doors. Flashlights danced through the house and the cellar entrance. Backup officers took statements. EMTs secured equipment. Jack finally sank onto the porch steps, hands resting on his knees, exhaustion creeping in now that the adrenaline had ebbed. Kyle joined him with a thermos in hand, offering it silently. Jack took it and drank deeply. Lukewarm coffee never tasted better. "You did good, Turner. Kyle said that girl would have vanished for good if you hadn't gone off instinct." Jack shrugged. "Wasn't just instinct. Bruno found the trail. Heelways does." Kyle looked toward the ambulance. "He staying retired?" Jack cracked a smile. "Not a chance." From the open doors of the ambulance, Emily leaned out and waved to Jack. Her face was still pale, but there was a light in her eyes again. Bruno remained beside her, unmoving. Jack lifted a hand in return. A few feet away, Lana snapped one last photo. Jack waving, Emily safe, Bruno in the background like a loyal shadow. That image she already knew would be the front page of tomorrow's paper. The Maple Creek Sheriff's Department had never been busier. The normally quiet precinct buzzed, with tension. Radios crackling, phones ringing, and deputies moving with urgency through the narrow hallways. The clock on the wall blinked 3:27 a.m., but nobody looked tired, at least not visibly. Not with 3 suspects in custody, a kidnapped daughter of the mayor rescued, and whispers of narcotics ring creeping out from the shadows. Jack Turner stood just outside Interrogation Room B, arms crossed, back straight. His uniform had been changed. Since the incident, though the bruise on his collarbone and scuffed knuckles still told the story. Beside him sat Bruno, calm but alert, the soft pads of his feet pressed into the linoleum floor. The old German shepherd had barely left Jack's side since they returned. Now he waited, ears twitching at every voice inside the room. Inside the interrogation room sat Rick Landry, former private security officer for Mayor Carter. Once clean-shaven and dressed in black suits, Rick now looked disheveled, his hoodie streaked with dirt, hands cuffed to the steel table, his square jaw clenched, mouth set in a grim line. Sweat glistened on his temple despite the cool room temperature. Across from him sat Detective Alicia Rowe, recently transferred from Chicago. In her early 40s, Alicia was known for her no-nonsense demeanor and ice-cold patience. She was tall, with dark skin and tightly braided hair pulled into a bun, her navy suit crisp and spotless. Her sharp brown eyes scanned every flicker of movement, and her voice rarely rose above a calm monotone that unnerved suspects more than shouting ever could. "Let me make this simple, Rick," she said, tapping a pen against the folder in front of her. "We know what the warehouse permits say. We know your guys had Emily Carter in a locked room for 3 days, and we know you're not the one in charge." Rick said nothing. From outside the glass, Jack watched silently. Bruno, sensing the tension, let out a low, deliberate growl. The sound rumbled through the walls. Rick's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Alicia. She didn't blink. "You want to keep pretending you're protecting someone? Fine, but your friends are in the next room and they're already talking." Rick shifted in his seat. Bruno growled again, louder this time. Jack didn't give the dog any command. He knew Bruno understood what was happening, and somehow the dog always knew when the suspect was about to break. Inside, Rick exhaled sharply. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Alicia leaned forward slightly. "Then tell me how far it was supposed to go." He looked at the table, then muttered, "We weren't supposed to hurt her. Just scare her father into signing off." "Signing what?" Rick hesitated again, then said, "A zoning permit. For a new industrial shipping terminal on the old Danner site." Down by the county line, Jack's eyes narrowed. The Danner site had been dormant for years, environmentally restricted after a failed fertilizer plant left the soil poisoned. Alicia nodded slowly. "You expect me to believe you kidnapped the mayor's daughter to get a rubber stamp for an abandoned lot?" Rick looked up. "You don't get it. That's just the paperwork, and the project was a front." She paused. "For what?" Rick swallowed hard. "A distribution hub. The plan was to market as an industrial chemical transport site, legit on paper, but it would be used to move product high volume, long distance, out of state. We're talking dozens of trucks a week, disguised as chemical shipments. They said the paperwork would shield it from inspection." Alicia's hand still on the pen. "Who gave you those instructions?" she asked. Rick didn't answer. Bruno's growl came again, soft but chilling. Jack opened the door just enough for the dog to step inside. Bruno padded forward and sat near the edge of the room, eyes fixed on Rick. No barking, no movement, just still focused pressure. Rick looked at the dog, jaw tight. "You think a dog's going to scare me?" Alicia raised an eyebrow. "He doesn't have to. You already know what you've done." Rick looked away again, but this time his resolve cracked. "The guy in charge. Nobody calls him by name. Just the Trump. I only saw him once in person. Slick suit, silver cufflinks, real calm. He doesn't talk much. He uses guys like me to run the jobs. All he cares about is expansion. He said if the mayor wouldn't sign off, then Emily would be the price." Alicia's voice dropped. "So you agreed to be that price?" "I owed them," Rick muttered. "From way back, I couldn't say no." Meanwhile, in interrogation room A, the second suspect, Miguel Dusty Rojos, a wiry man in his 30s with a nervous habit of cracking his knuckles, was already sobbing. Deputy Kyle Mendez stood over him, shaking his head as Dusty blurted out half sentences between hiccups. He said the mayor's signature would keep inspections away. I didn't even touch the girl. I just drove the van, man. I didn't sign up for any of that basement crap. Back in the hallway, Alicia stepped out and closed the door behind her. Jack looked at her. Well, he asked. They're confirming each other's stories unintentionally, she said. It's bigger than we thought. That chemical plant was just a cover. We're talking about a regional trafficking route, maybe bigger. Jack exhaled slowly. And they were willing to hurt the mayor's daughter to make it happen. She nodded grimly, and if they'd succeeded, that permit would have been approved, and the distribution line would have gone live within a month. Undetectable, legal on paper, Jack looked down at Bruno, who was now sitting in the hallway, head resting against the wall, watching everything. You did good, he said softly. Bruno blinked and let out a tired huff of air. Later that morning, Jack sat at his desk thumbing through the forged permit application pulled from Rick's backpack. It looked official, stamped with the seal of a fake regulatory board signed by someone using the name K. Royston. Deputy Mendes walked by and dropped a fresh folder in front of him. You'll want to see this, Kyle said. Paper trail in the zoning deal. Traces back to 3 shell companies registered in Nevada, all tied to one parent corp. Kendrick's Holdings. Jack leaned back in his chair. Kendrick's. The name meant nothing yet, but the signature on the permit matched the one they'd found on 2 others flagged last year in Illinois and Oklahoma. They had a pattern, and now they had proof. The chill of dawn hung heavy in the air as dark silhouettes moved through the industrial outskirts of Willow Creek. Floodlights flickered on one by one, casting harsh beams over the crumbling brick walls of an old factory once used for grain storage. No, it stood as the suspected epicenter of the town's drug smuggling operation. Behind one of the SWAT vans, Officer Jack Turner adjusted the strap of his bulletproof vest. His storm-gay eyes scanned the perimeter while his hand rested gently on the back of his partner, Bruno. The 10-year-old German shepherd, who had time and again proven himself more than just a retired K9. Bruno's coat glinted under the morning light sable streaked with silver, his left ear bent as always, and a faint scar tracing the back of his hind leg. But today he stood tall and alert, nose twitching, sensing something hidden beyond the metal walls. FBI agent Laura Kingsley stepped beside Jack. A tall, dark-haired woman in her early 40s. Her features were sharp, her voice steady. She had a no-nonsense demeanor shaped by years of undercover work. But today, her respect for Jack was evident in the way she consulted him before each move. We follow Bruno's lead, she said, glancing at the dog who was already sniffing around the southeast wall of the warehouse. Jack nodded. He's locked onto something. Let's move inside. The team advanced silently. Night vision gear painting the warehouse in a green glow. Empty crates and broken shelving littered the main hall, but Bruno led them beyond that through a narrow hallway where the scent changed. He paused at what looked like a solid wall and gave a short bark. One paw tapped at a groove along the floor. Agent Kingsley motioned for the team to stand back. A few minutes later, Acrobar wedged into a seam revealed a hidden door, rusted and damp. Bruno growled softly, backing up. Something was behind it. With a synchronized breach, the team burst into the room. Inside, rows of shelves lined the walls, stacked with vacuum-sealed bricks of narcotics, weapons, and a map pinned to the wall showing routes across the state. At the far end, a small trapdoor lay open, fresh boot prints and drag marks leading away. Bruno barked once, then sprinted toward the rear entrance. Outside, the scene had already shifted. Another SWAT team, directed by intel from Bruno's earlier sweep, had uncovered a tunnel system beneath the factory. It led to a nearby drainage system, a perfect escape route. But not today. Down in the murky tunnel, flashlights flickered. The scent was thick with oil, damp concrete, and fear. Bruno's growls echoed ahead as Jack and Kingsley pursued. Around a bend, they spotted them, and three men soaked and cornered. One of them was Marco Solano, the elusive kingpin, who had operated under a web of fake names and political bribes. His sharp eyes darted wildly until they landed on Bruno, now standing firm in the ankle-deep water, teeth bared. Solano tried to raise a weapon, but before he could act, Bruno lunged. The gun clattered to the ground, and the others surrendered. By sunrise, the scene outside the warehouse was a blur of flashing lights, handcuffed criminals, and agents processing evidence. News vans began arriving, capturing the fall of the largest drug network ever uncovered in the region. As Jack stood near his cruiser, gently wiping Bruno's face with a damp cloth, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. "Jack," he turned. Mayor David Carter, once proud and polished, now weary and humbled, approached, eyes red, breath heavy. He was a man in his late 50s, with streaks of gray running through his dark blonde hair and a weathered look born from months of anxiety and guilt. Jack straightened, unsure of the mayor's intentions, but Carter didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stepped forward and pulled Jack into a tight embrace. "You saved her," the mayor whispered, his voice cracking. "You saved Emily." Jack froze for a moment, surprised, before gently patting the man's back. "She's safe. That's what matters." Mayor Carter stepped back, his eyes glassy. "And I owe you something more than thanks. I owe you an apology. I turned a blind eye when the corruption started. I convinced myself it was politics, that it wasn't my place to dig too deep. But I failed this town, and I failed my daughter Jack's." Expression softened. "What matters now is doing better. Cleaning this up for good." Carter nodded. "And we will." Starting today nearby, Bruno let out a loud woof, tail wagging slightly as if sensing the moment had turned. Kingsley approached with a small box in her hands. "I thought you'd want this," she said, handing it to Jack. Inside were tags, photos, and a letter from the original task force that had investigated Solano's cartel years ago. Some of the same officers Jack once worked alongside. Many of them had fallen trying to stop this very operation. Jack looked at the photos, then down at Bruno, who now sat beside him like a silent guardian. "Full circle," Jack murmured. "And he's Theon who led us here." Bruno gave a soft huff, leaning into Jack's leg. Around them, the chaos began to settle. The town would sleep easier tonight, but more than that, truth had found its way back. Led not by politics or power, but by a dog who never gave up and a man who followed him. The bell tower of Maple Creek City Hall rang proudly as townsfolk filled the front square, their footsteps echoing across the brick courtyard. Autumn leaves swirled in the breeze like golden confetti, and the town's flag danced against a crisp, cloudless sky. The building's white columns were freshly scrubbed, adorned with navy and gold ribbons for the special ceremony, a rare honor for a small town, and an even rarer one for a dog. Jack Turner stood near the podium in his formal uniform, badge polished. Toa mirrored shine. He looked almost uncomfortable with the attention, adjusting his collar now and then, but his back was straight, his jaw firm. Beside him, Bruno sat tall and regal, his deep brown eyes scanning the crowd calmly. His usual harness had been replaced with a navy blue bandana around his neck, embroidered with a silver star. The crowd loved it. Mayor David Carter stepped forward, to the microphone, his voice carrying clear over the speakers. He had aged visibly over the past yearless sleep, more gray, but his shoulders held a new strength, a kind of humble resolve. The scandal that had nearly destroyed Maple Creek had paradoxically breathed new life into its leadership. "Today," Mayor Carter began, "we honored two citizens who reminded us what courage looks like when everything is on the line. One is a man who served with duty, integrity, and heart. The other, well, he's a little furrier." A ripple of laughter ran through the audience, I speak, of course, of Officer Jack Turner and his partner Bruno. Without them, my daughter would not be standing here. Without them, this town might have become a hidden artery in a poisoned network. But instead, they uncovered the truth and protected what matters most: our people, our home. The mayor paused, his voice catching slightly. Emily, standing beside the podium, gave him a soft nod of encouragement. He cleared his throat and continued. It is my privilege to present both of them with the Maple Creek Medal of Valor. Thunderous applause erupted as Jack stepped forward. He shook the mayor's hand and bowed his head as the medal was placed around his neck. Then came Bruno's moment. Emily stepped forward, kneeling as she carefully looped a smaller version of the medal onto Bruno's collar beneath the blue bandana. Bruno didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the stage. The entire square melted into cheers and clapping, children waving handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Bruno, and our heroes." As the applause faded, Jack leaned into the microphone. "We didn't do this for medals. We did it because it was right. But thank you for believing in something bigger than fear." Bruno barked once, perfectly timed, and the crowd laughed again. Time passed, the seasons turned, and Maple Creek slowly healed. A year later, on a warm spring morning, the stained glass windows of the town's old church shimmered under sunlight. Inside, soft organ music played as guests filled the pews. Flowers lined the aisle, white lees, and blue forget-me-nots. At the front of the altar, Jack stood again in formal attire, though this time his uniform was replaced by a gray suit. His face was calmer now, lines softened by happiness. Emily Carter walked toward him, radiant in a flowing white gown. Her hair, once tangled with fear, now curled softly over her shoulders, pinned with sprigs of lavender. She was no longer the trembling woman from the basement. She'd become strong, sure, filled with laughter and purpose. And ahead of her, proudly trotting down the aisle in a miniature tuxedo vest and the same blue bandana, was Bruno. He carried no rings, just dignity. The guests rose, smiles wide. A few laughed through tears. At the altar, Bruno sat beside Jack and looked up at him once as if to say, "You've come a long way, partner." Jack looked back down, eyes glinting. "You're still best man, buddy." The ceremony was short, heartfelt, full of quiet joy. When Jack and Emily exchanged vows, Bruno let out a soft woof, breaking the solemnity for just a moment, bringing laughter and easing tears. After the ceremony, under the maple trees that gave the town its name, the reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and the clinking of glasses. Children petted Bruno, who seemed to know this was his day too. At one point, he was even spotted chewing on a piece of wedding cake someone had accidentally dropped. The news eventually spread beyond town limits. National articles called it the wedding that justice built. Pictures of Bruno in his best man outfit went viral. Months later, as summer set in, Jack, Emily, and Bruno moved into a renovated farmhouse on the edge of town, not far from the one where it all began. The old haunted rumors had long faded, replaced by stories of bravery, and the land had been reclaimed, cleaned, and renewed. Their new home had a front porch where Jack would drink. His morning coffee Emily would read, and Bruno would rest at their feet, ever watchful. Inside the house, on a wooden shelf, sat 3 framed objects: Jack's Medal of Valor, Bruno's canine medal, and a photograph of the 3 of them from their wedding day. Jack and Emily smiling, and Bruno proudly sitting between them, head held high. It was a home built not just on love, but on something even deeper: truth, loyalty, and the belief that light can win when good hearts refuse to give up. Justice had been served, peace restored, and in the quiet days that followed, it was Bruno who reminded them, in every wag of his tail and every calm glance, that even in the darkest moments, the bond between a man, a dog, and the people they protect can change everything. Sometimes the miracles we seek do not arrive with trumpets or thunder, but in the silence of an old barn, through the steady steps of a loyal dog, or in the hands of those who choose compassion over comfort. Just like the officer who followed a whimper into a forgotten place and found more than he imagined, justice, healing, and a bond deeper than words. So too can we find unexpected grace in the corners of our own lives. This story reminds us that God often works through the smallest moments: a bark in the distance, a glint of truth in broken places, a heart willing to follow the light. When we pause to listen, to act, to believe, we become part of something greater, part of God's quiet restoration of the world. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Type Amen in the comments if you believe that no soul is ever truly lost when love leads the way. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope, faith, and redemption. May God bless everyone watching this, and may we all carry a bit more grace into the world.